It began, as it often does, with a bold declaration. The world watched, holding its breath, as the familiar figure stepped up to the microphone, ready to make headlines once again. On a crisp July morning in 2025, President Donald Trump, having reclaimed the Oval Office, stood before the nation and the world to announce sweeping new tariffs. The sun glinted off the White House columns, but the mood was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters jostled for position, pens poised, as Trump prepared to unveil a policy that would ripple across the globe. Flanked by a row of American flags, Trump's voice rang out with characteristic confidence. He declared it was time to fight back against what he called decades of unfair trade practices, promising to put American interests first and restore the nation's economic strength. The goal was clear: protect American jobs and bring manufacturing back home. Trump spoke of shuttered factories and lost livelihoods, painting a picture of a nation that had been taken advantage of for too long. He vowed to reverse the trend, to reignite the engines of American industry. This was more than just another policy announcement. It was the fulfillment of a campaign promise that had energized his base. For many, it was a moment of vindication, proof that Trump intended to deliver on his word. The tariffs were sweeping in scope, targeting steel, aluminum, consumer electronics, auto parts, and even a range of agricultural products. No sector was left untouched, as Trump aims to level the playing field for American producers and workers. Trump's America First philosophy was unmistakable: make foreign goods more expensive so American companies could compete on fairer terms. He argued that for too long, cheap imports had flooded the market, undercutting domestic businesses and costing American jobs. He painted a vision of bustling factories, humming with activity and secure jobs for hardworking Americans. In his speech, he spoke directly to the workers on the factory floor, promising a future where their skills and labor would once again be valued and rewarded. The message resonated deeply with voters who felt left behind by globalization and rapid technological change. In towns hollowed out by plant closures, hope flickered anew at the prospect of a manufacturing revival. Throughout his campaign, Trump had promised to use tariffs as a primary economic tool, a weapon to defend American interests and force trading partners to the negotiating table. Now, he was making good on that pledge. He sees trade deficits not just as numbers on a spreadsheet, but as a sign of American weakness, a symptom of deals that favored other nations at the expense of American workers and businesses. Supporters hailed this as strong, decisive leadership, a long overdue correction to decades of flawed trade deals. They cheered, believing that finally, someone was standing up for the American worker. But the announcement sent shockwaves through global markets. Investors reacted instantly with stock tickers flashing red, and analysts scrambling to assess the potential fallout. Wall Street watched with anxiety, bracing for volatility. Meanwhile, international leaders convened emergency meetings, urgently discussing how to respond to America's new stance. Was this tough negotiation, or the opening salvo of a new trade war? With Trump, the lines between strategy and confrontation often blurred, leaving allies and rivals alike guessing his next move. Trump thrives on unpredictability, using it as a tool to keep opponents off balance. But for businesses and consumers, this unpredictability created real uncertainty. Small business owners worried about rising costs, while families braced for higher prices at the checkout. Across the country, Americans wondered what this new era of protectionism would mean for their wallets and their jobs. Would the tariffs spark a renaissance in American industry, or would they trigger higher costs and job losses in other sectors? The stage was set for a high-stakes economic drama, with the nation and the world watching closely. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, America braced for impact, uncertain of what the future would hold, but knowing that change was already underway. So, what is a tariff? You've probably heard the word tossed around in news reports or political debates, but what does it actually mean for you and the economy? Simply put, a tariff is a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. It's one of the oldest tools governments use to regulate trade and raise money. When foreign products arrive at U.S. ports, the government steps in and adds a charge. This fee is paid by the importer, the company or person bringing the goods into the country. But that cost doesn't just disappear. Instead, it gets passed along the supply chain, affecting everyone involved. Importers facing higher costs often raise their prices when selling to retailers. Retailers in turn increase prices for shoppers to cover their own expenses. So, when you buy that new TV, a block of cheese, or even a pair of shoes, you're likely paying a portion of the tariff, hidden right there in the price tag, even if you never see it itemized. Supporters of tariffs argue they help protect American jobs and industries from foreign competition, and they also provide valuable revenue for the U.S. Treasury. Politicians often frame tariffs as a matter of fairness and national pride, encouraging people to buy American-made products and support local businesses. However, most economists caution that tariffs can do more harm than good. They warn that these taxes often lead to higher prices for everyone and can slow down economic growth. Many American manufacturers rely on imported materials to make their products. When tariffs raise the cost of these materials, it becomes more expensive to produce goods here at home. For example, a tariff on steel can make American cars more costly to build, which can lead to higher prices for consumers and fewer sales for automakers. Other countries may retaliate by imposing their own tariffs on American exports, making it harder for U.S. businesses to sell their products overseas. It's a chain reaction. Once tariffs are set in motion, the effects ripple through the entire economy, often in unpredictable ways. The economic reality is far more complex than the political slogans suggest. Tariffs may sound simple, but their impact is felt by businesses, workers, and consumers alike, shaping the prices we pay and the jobs we depend on. The effects of the new tariffs hit store shelves fast. Grocery bills crept up. Imported cheeses, avocados, and specialty foods all cost more. Electronics saw price hikes too. Smartphones and laptops jumped by hundreds. Retailers blamed higher import costs, passing them to consumers. The auto industry was hit hard. Cars assembled with global parts became pricier, even for American brands. A family sedan's price jumped by thousands, forcing buyers to reconsider. Home improvement projects got more expensive as tariffs on Canadian lumber drove up costs. Contractors passed these increases to homeowners. From groceries to gadgets to home repairs, Americans felt the pinch. The promise of protection came with a rising price tag. Everyday life became more expensive. The impact was impossible to ignore. Canada's response was swift and firm. Prime Minister Trudeau condemned the tariffs, calling them unacceptable. Canada suspended trade talks, refusing to negotiate under threat. Retaliatory tariffs targeted U.S. steel, aluminum, and iconic products like bourbon and orange juice. The aim pressure key American industries and voters. The U.S.-Canada relationship, built on decades of trust, was suddenly strained. Canada's move froze economic cooperation and created uncertainty for cross-border businesses. The two economies, once deeply intertwined, now faced a standoff. Canada gambled that economic pain would force a U.S. policy change, but both sides risked a prolonged, damaging trade war. Allies had become adversaries. Canada's retaliation hit American farmers and manufacturers hard. U.S. agricultural exports to Canada, cheese, pork, yogurt, became too expensive, drying up orders overnight. Manufacturers relying on North American supply chains faced higher costs and lost sales. Auto parts makers paid more for Canadian steel and faced new taxes selling to Canada. Small businesses near the border lost Canadian customers as tariffs made U.S. goods pricier. The pain spread from rural farms to city factories to Main Street shops. Uncertainty froze business plans and investments. The so-called tariff chaos forced companies to play defense, not offense. Economic momentum stalled. Under fire, Trump doubled down. He dismissed reports of price hikes as fake news and blamed globalists for the backlash. On social media, he insisted tariffs were working and any pain was worth the long-term gain. He called Canada's response weak and threatened even higher tariffs. At a press conference, Trump promised aid for farmers hurt by the trade war, funded by tariff revenue. Critics called this a circular process, taxing one group to bail out another. Trump's narrative America was finally fighting back and patience would pay off. Business owners and economists, however, reported uncertainty and loss. The president's message clashed with economic reality. He asked Americans to trust his plan over their own experiences. The stakes and the rhetoric kept rising. Across the nation, economists and financial analysts sounded the alarm, their voices echoing through boardrooms and newsrooms alike. The economic consequences of the new tariffs, they warned, could be far-reaching and severe, affecting not just Wall Street, but everyday Americans. Tariffs, they argued, are a blunt tool. While they may offer short-term protection to certain industries, they often inflict broader harm. Prices on imported goods rise, making everyday essentials more expensive for families and businesses alike. Dr. Amelia Vance of the Peterson Institute warned that the real cost falls squarely on U.S. consumers and businesses, who ultimately pay higher prices and face fewer choices at the checkout counter. Wall Street analysts pointed to increased market volatility and a chilling effect on new investments. Investors, uncertain about the future, hesitated to commit capital, slowing economic growth. Companies that rely on global supply chains suddenly faced new risks, delays, higher costs, and shrinking profits. Many were forced to rethink their strategies, cut jobs, or even relocate operations overseas. While some experts saw strategic value in tariffs as a negotiating tool, most doubted the administration's endgame, questioning whether the benefits would ever outweigh the mounting costs. Nobel laureates and historians alike warned of repeating the mistakes of the 1930s, when escalating trade wars deepened the Great Depression and prolonged economic suffering for millions. Disrupted supply chains and tit-for-tat tariffs, they said, risked not just stagnation, but a potential slide into recession. Factories slowed, shelves emptied, and cross-border commerce ground to a halt. The growing consensus was clear. Protectionism could isolate and ultimately impoverish the nation, leaving American workers and businesses less competitive on the world stage. As the economic fallout became more apparent, calls grew louder for a return to open trade and international cooperation, urging policymakers to reconsider their approach. The expert community's warning was clear and urgent. With risks mounting by the day, the nation stood at a crossroads, facing a choice between isolation and engagement with the global economy. For families, the trade war meant tough choices. Rising prices forced Americans to delay big purchases and stretch their budgets. Shoppers hunted for domestic goods, but true made-in-America products were hard to find. Tourism and cross-border business slowed as relations with Canada cooled. Everyday life became a balancing act: support the policy or protect your wallet. The promise of a stronger America felt distant amid economic anxiety. The cost of tariffs was personal and immediate. By summer's end, America stood at a crossroads. Tariff blowback was real: rising prices, lost markets, and business uncertainty. The administration's gamble forced concessions without crippling the economy. But the risk of recession loomed as spending and investment slowed, trade partnerships frayed, and new global alliances formed without the U.S. The road ahead was perilous. De-escalation required compromise. Escalation risked deeper damage. The outcome of Trump's tariffs remained uncertain. For Americans, the wait for answers had just begun.